Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Developing the Lab. Before we get started, I'd like to go across the stage here and have everybody introduce themselves and explain a little bit about what they do here at Valve. Start with you at the end there.
Yeah, I'm Don from Valve. I'm a programmer.
I'm Tejeev, also from Valve, and also a programmer designer.
I'm Jeep, also a programmer.
Hi, I'm David Sawyer, a gameplay designer, a programmer.
I'm Paul Thuriot. I'm a character technical director.
I'm Matt Charlesworth, do art and design on the lab.
And I'm Christopher Katz. I do a little bit of everything. Let's get started. Guys, why did we make the lab?
So from the earliest days of Valve having a hardware team, there were also content people embedded with the team, exploring, building demos to validate the hardware, exploring the space as content people, learning how to build VR content. The lab team and the lab as a product grew organically out of those experiments and out of those demos that we built along the way as we built the hardware, as we learned the space ourselves. There was a pretty smooth progression, and at some point we realized explicitly that we didn't want to learn a bunch of stuff and then hit a reset point and then decide what the product was. We wanted to ship the experiences that we'd built along the way and find a way to get those to customers and let those experience the same things that we'd been building.
Yeah, one of the surprising things was, we didn't know how to make a VR game when we started. We learned that as we went along. And each experiment that we did, we were sort of surprised by what was working and what wasn't working. And we wanted customers to be able to have that same sense of surprise in terms of what types of things in VR are really fun and interesting, and be able to just experience those in the same way that we did. But for context, it makes a lot more sense to kind of go back to where the lab started, which was at Steam Developer Days 2 years ago. We did the room demo, and from that, we started getting a sense of what are the things that are really working in a non-interactive sense, but what scenes were people enjoying, and we wanted to build something that encapsulated a lot of those high points and add interaction on top of that. But where we actually started before, so at GDC the year after, we showed robot repair, Aperture robot repair. But before we built that demo, we actually built the secret shop, which had the secret shop.
Shopkeeper.
The shopkeeper, yeah.
Yeah, early on when we first started, we were really small. And they were saying, it was super early in what VR was. We didn't know. We were really excited by almost everything we did. What we wanted to do was just experiment and have this central play area where everyone could just contribute and just try things out. And we, since we were so small, we wanted to just reuse as much as we could and see what that meant. One of the experiments we really were interested in was the presence of you being in a room with another, CG character. And we looked around at our assets and found that we had this high-res shopkeeper already set up with a facial system and everything. And so we decided, let's just build upon this. And so, because it was so early, the simplest things were so exciting. We first did this little monologue of the shopkeeper just doing his thing with you in a room, and we just added in the first little simple thing of a look at where his head and his eyes would track you and your headset, and that was so exciting. It was so funny just watching that. It was like everybody got so excited, adding a little point, every once in a while whenever the speech just needed it. It was so basic, but so exciting. It just grew into all these new experiments we were playing with.
The earliest days of this whole process were some of the most exciting times I've ever had as a developer, because it was such a privilege to be there at the very beginning of these things and have access to the earliest hardware, and to be among the first people getting to explore this space. And I found that process joyful as a designer, and one of the guiding feelings that I wanted to sort of get into our products was that sort of childish joy of exploration, like learning this new space, learning the new possibilities.
Just being there with an object, being able to pick it up, and even before that, just seeing it and being able to walk around something was so fun.
Yeah, that was actually the other thing with Secret Shop was we were trying to build really high fidelity assets and get a sense of how much work it would take to build those assets and build a pipeline for that and understand what tricks that we used to use in 2D would or wouldn't work in 3D.
Yeah, so early on, I'm sure all of you have run into this, we found normal maps didn't work out as well as we hoped, just because you don't get the parallaxing when you get really close to objects. Performance is the key. It's more about the asset being performant, because one little drop of a frame will just instantly make you ill. So with the shopkeeper, for example, we had a really high-res face, really high-res asset, and we had to keep on going back and back and back to down-res it just so it would be performant enough at all times, no matter what you were looking at or what was happening in the space, because, again, just that one drop of a frame, it would just change everything.
Yeah. Before that point, all of our content had been, it was relatively easy to make it run in perf because it was all sort of crude and experimental, and that was our first attempt to build something that we thought might be shipping quality, but we had no idea how to do that yet, and so there was a lot of exploration about
Yeah, that space,
how to build the art assets.
because that was just an exploration space, we did all kinds of things. We did, what happens when we added wind chimes and you could interact with them in simple, knocking them around. Cloth was fun in there.
Yeah, well, you didn't even have your hands at that point. Like, you would actually hit the wind chimes with your head.
Yeah,
Yeah, we didn't have controllers back then. So,
That cloth actually broke my brain.
yeah. But then after the Secret Shop, we were planning on showing off the headset for the first time to the world at the GDC 2015. And we realized that the Secret Shop demo we built was more of an exploration space and didn't work well for a tight timed demo at GDC. And that's when we decided to work on a different demo, which eventually became the Aperture robot repair that we showed off at GDC that year. And that was, again, a similar kind of thing where we were making production quality assets that were like AAA type shipping assets. But even throughout the entire production of that, we didn't have final hardware. Right? Like, we were still prototyping on DK2s and no controllers.
Yeah, as a parallel thread during that time, we were trickling out controllers. And
Yeah, we were working alongside the hardware team. Like, we were both developing the product at the same time, so the hardware wasn't ready and the software wasn't there. Like, it was both kind of coming
we kept on
online
assuming
together.
these things would just show up.
Right.
Yeah, we assumed like,
We knew-
we'll
we knew
probably
they
have
would arrive.
controllers and 360 tracking, and we'll probably have those things. We didn't have them back then, but
But yeah, the idea there was to build a narrative experience and have something that fits within a 5-minute demo, but that gives people a sense of progression through the environment and have it change and see different things. And that's, like I was talking about before, was sort of the best hits of what we showed at Steam Developer Days the year before that, was just to find all those high points and kind of put them in a single place.
Like the ledge.
yeah, we had the ledge part, the drawer, and like all those things that we had at Dev Days. We refined them and like included them in the Aperture demo.
And the controllers came on pretty late into the process of building.
Yeah, probably a couple months
Aperture,
before.
actually.
Yeah, at first you would open the drawers with your face. You would go up to a drawer and then pull it open, and then you'd shut it.
Because we only had one cracked thing, which was the headset.
Yeah.
So we would just be like, the headset is in the trigger. Okay, the headset is doing this. It worked, but it was fun.
It didn't work.
But
That's
then
the thing, we were always just trying everything. That was the key. We didn't know if it would work or not.
There was an
Had to
assumption
try.
that this tech would come, right?
Yeah.
And we were just trying to.
Yeah,
We did a lot of stuff with our face that we got hand controllers. It was just like, wow.
Well, before the bounds came in and how we'd walk into walls and stuff.
Yeah,
That's true.
Yeah, the chaperone system and stuff. But then after GDC, we came back. We all came back from GDC super excited. Like, we had shown the world the Vive headset, and people were excited about it. And the Aperture demo was successful at showing off a tight 5-minute piece. But then from there, we came back and said, okay, well, now what do we do after this? And we all had, like, every one of us had different ideas and different things of what would work, what wouldn't work. And we just wanted to all try out different things.
Right. We
And at
felt
the same time, we all had controllers then, too.
Yeah, that was the first time we actually had controllers.
When we were developing the Aperture demo, most of us did not have controllers.
Yeah.
So after GDC, we felt like we needed to take some time as a team to cast around again.
Yeah.
And we felt like we didn't have enough sort of tools in our design toolbox to make the full experience of the product.
There was so much uncharted space and
Yeah,
like things to
right.
cover.
Right. And so we'd had some experiments from before Aperture, but then we cast out again. We started forming smaller groups and building smaller experiences.
Right.
And it was I think at that time we might not have been clear whether we were going to then reset and build take one of those experiences and make it deep, or whether, sometime shortly after that, we decided that the way we needed to go was, the pace of discovery was so fast that it didn't feel like we had the ability to explore,
predict,
and stop discovering, and now we're going to go in production mode with this fixed design.
Because I think we knew when we came back from GDC that, the headset's going to ship in about a year's time.
Right.
We want to have some piece of content from us that ships alongside it.
Yeah.
And
We knew
we weren't sure what that was going to be, right?
Yeah, we knew it wasn't going to be big, but we had the internal statement of we were going to make the Wii Sports of VR.
Yeah. Well, that's when we decided that, because we didn't know what we can produce in a year, and and again, like Dave was saying, we didn't know how to predict what would work in VR and what wouldn't. So we decided let's just make a bunch of smaller experiences and kind of like the Wii Sports of VR follows.
Well, we'd never actually made a game in VR right up to that point. They were all smaller experiences. So the idea of kind of putting all of our eggs in one basket and hoping that would work wasn't super appealing, was it? So, but we had a bunch of ideas that were just kind of random points in space.
What was also different for us is because we had a deadline.
Yeah.
That couldn't ship. We knew there was
not
something
typical
we had
for
to
us.
ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Wii Sports of VR really just means showing the breadth of all the different things that you can do in VR that make room scale and VR interesting, and kind of showing those off in different contained things where people can find their own favorite and really dig deep into that. And that was sort of what we were going for. So did balloons or arrows come first?
I think the balloon stuff came, the fact of us playing with balloons in VR came from Steve Cody, I think.
One of our
he built the demo where you're in, I think we modeled out the demo room, the room that had all of the MPTM markers in it.
Yeah.
The physical room at Valve.
Right,
Yeah, this was before controllers.
He was trying an AR kind of thing where you're in that room and the ceiling opens, I think, and balloons come pouring down and you've got a needle attached to your face. I don't know.
Yeah, and you could burst the balloons.
Right.
Yeah. It was pretty funny because people were just doing this the entire time.
But we had these the prototype headsets in those days with the exposed circuit boards, and we have people doing I think somebody got headbutted with it once.
Yeah. So once we got controllers, a lot changed about the way that things like balloons too.
Right. So there was while people were working on the secret shop, there was a thread of the track controllers were first appearing on our desks, and the balloons and the bow and arrow were among the first things the balloon maker, I guess, was among the first things that we built, because I was spending some time just learning how to use these things and trying to discover the range of possibilities. And there was a lot of sort of grabbing existing assets and playing and experimenting. It felt like I just had a play set, right? We've got all these interesting assets, and I'm going to try and figure out what to do with these things now. And the balloon tool was actually just one of those sort of childish, joyful things. I was like, I've got this balloon model. I love balloons, but
You don't want to clean up after
I'm not going to blow up 100 balloons and clean them up. And it was so simple and wonderful to make a balloon and bop it around and feel the head. That was a vehicle for learning how to do haptics.
Yep.
And making you believe the sensations with the haptics.
Yeah. And the physics of the balloon just happened to work really well in VR, because when you hit a balloon, your hand naturally just goes where the balloon is. So
it gives you a little tap.
Yeah, it just bops
really
the balloon
subtle.
a little bit and goes from there. And that works really well in VR.
Right.
And
then the longbow stuff came. When I was a kid, I used to love doing archery. And I lived in a place where I could do it in my driveway, easy access to it. I moved to Seattle, grew up and moved to Seattle at some point. I realized, I could do that again. I should go buy a bow and arrow. And I remember I bought my bow and arrow, and I got my half a dozen arrows, and I drove up on the mountains, and I set up my target in the woods, and I shot all 6 arrows, and every one of them went into the bushes and was lost forever. And I drove home, and that was it. I thought, there's got to be a better way.
How long of a drive was that?
And the bow came out of those early experiments with the controllers, trying to imagine things that we could do with both hands, trying to explore the haptics, just trying to explore that space and do that while sort of exploring experiences that VR somehow made better, like
You're not going to lose your arrows
you're
in
not gonna lose your
VR.
arrows. You're like,
Yeah.
you get the simple, joyful action without the sort of real-world cruft of it.
Yeah,
Right.
and also there can be moving targets that you
Yeah,
can shoot
right.
at.
And I can shoot the balloons, and I can.
Yeah.
I
Well,
remember the first time I came to your desk to try it, I didn't want to give his headset back. It's too good.
Yeah.
Well,
Like towards the end, like our philosophy kind of became like let's emulate real world objects, but only if they're better, or the idealized version of
Yeah.
the real world object.
Yeah, we had some stuff that didn't work very well because we were emulating real-world stuff, but it wasn't better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
real
just like
world stuff was
It
better.
was like we were stacking blocks. which-
Blocks.
and it just like well, stacking blocks works pretty well in the real world.
Right.
In VR, it's like a little bit janky and doesn't quite work, and the physics
Yeah.
doesn't quite
You're,
work.
you're trying to
right.
build a castle, and
and
everything's kind
everything's
of.
You
kind of
don't have-
wobbly and shaky and stuff.
You don't have full tactile fingers, right? You've got these
Yeah.
sticks, and you're kind of.
And so we just realized like we should only be doing stuff in VR that's emulating the real world if it's a better idealized version of that real world object in VR.
Yeah. So like building the giant slingshot, you're not going to build a giant slingshot in real life.
No,
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to stack all those boxes.
Yeah.
Well, Slingshot, you bring it up, it was a great experiment of just figuring out how to interact with a larger space than what you're actually standing at the time.
Yeah, Slingshot sort of came out of those early days where, we were kind of thinking we'd be constrained to a very specific room size, that we would have a room size and we would do all of our
Well, like,
things
because
there.
in the Aperture demo,
And-
like the actual room that the Aperture demo takes place in is the exact size of our GDC demo booth that year.
Yeah.
That's how we. That's
Yeah, that's
how
like,
we designed it.
It was to show off how big the tracking volume was.
The maximum
So, the
extent.
maximum
Yeah.
possible
Yeah.
tracking volume, and not everybody has that much space to put aperture in. So we
Yeah.
kind of had to retrofit that with a.
Yeah, but back to Slingshot though, like that was
Yeah, that was the same artist, Steve Cody. He just he hacked this thing together in a couple days with Playmaker, and he basically the cool thing was that it would encourage walking, like you would sort of walk and use a lot of that space, and also affect a bigger space outside of that room. So we were starting to think, okay, maybe stuff happens outside of that. Large room.
Yeah, it was cool seeing really huge towers of boxes fall
Yeah.
in the distance and
And-
feeling like you're in this very vast space. You take off the headset and be like, oh yeah, I'm in
Yeah.
the office. It's weird.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm back on the 4th floor. of
Yeah.
this little- yeah. But yeah, we had a lot of different variations of that. We at one point had a multiplayer mode where you would shoot at each other's block castles, and that was pretty fun to watch somebody shoot a projectile at you and see your own castle
Yeah, actually-
crashing down around you.
The dog started in Slingshot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dog was going to be a special ammo type.
Well, that's one of the things.
It had nothing to do with the dog. It was just
Well, you gotta clarify. You can't just say the dog. You're not shooting the dog, but
No, you were good. He was going to come around in the conveyor belt behind you.
yeah. But then you pick him up and he goes into a pill.
Okay, sure. He
Yeah.
turns into a little pill, and then
Yeah.
you shoot him out. But
Yeah, that was because we had this conveyor belt on Slingshot, and we thought we were underutilizing it, and
yeah, we got the feedback because Slingshot was sort of
like a 180 kind of.
yeah, it was like, oh, hey, this is neat, but it's one directional. I'm always facing this way. VR is kind of cool because you can look behind you and pick up stuff all behind you. So we put that there. We didn't really have a purpose for it. So
Yeah.
we put a bunch of stuff in there that doesn't really do anything, and
Looks
that
cool.
was probably
Yeah.
that's just a thing we did.
Yeah,
So yeah, the dog ammo thing didn't really work out, so we nixed that. And then some of us were interested in just playing catch at one point. Again, simple things were part of the fun. And so, we had this little dog-like thing, and we did the simple thing where I can pick up a ball and throw it off in space, and we just had the dog go run in a linear direction, pick the thing up, bring it back.
There's actually one thing before that, because we had spaces where we had this, essentially the menu system where you kind of put the spheres on your face to go to different areas. And the problem was the first tester grabs the sphere, throws it, and then says, how do I get it?
Well, again,
Yeah,
when we
well-
first got controllers, what's the very first thing you want to do when you have something?
Pick up and
it up,
throw
Oh,
it.
throw
Pick
it
up
out.
and
Just
throw
go
it.
and toss stuff around.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
but that's when the dog. We had the prototype. Not it was an experiment of the dog playing fetch, and it was pretty cool. And we thought hey, we can use the dog to solve this other problem we have, which
Yeah.
is people throwing stuff outside their play space and not being able to get it back. And just if you throw stuff, the dog goes around and gets it back. And
Yeah, so one of the keys of our process throughout Valve is we play test everything. Everybody internally play tests, and we get other people. And even early on, when we had the dog doing fetch, I brought my kid in who was little, and it was kind of fun to watch because he has no idea what VR is. He actually didn't even know what computer games really were at the time. You give him a controller, he'd kind of get it right away. He'd see this little thing there, and he'd see a red ball, and he'd pick it up and throw it. And it was just fun to watch that they got it. They just got it. And then, of course, because he was young, well, he still wants a dog. He wanted a dog really bad. And it's a dog. I wanted to do this, this, this. And every time we had somebody come in and play test, they'd always add more things that they wanted to do. It was like you were saying.
They wanted to pet it. They wanted to pick it up.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, like, okay, this is VR, and I know what a real dog should do. I want that to happen too.
And I think there's something else to it where I for one, wasn't expecting it to end up going as deep as it did.
Yeah.
And I think
I don't think anybody did.
The playtests, I think, started to... The dog sort of enhances... I wasn't expecting this. Enhances your sense of presence by sort of believing that you're there, right? Like, you've got this creature in the world that you see, that you believe, the interactions make sense to you. Like, that feels like a real
creature.
creature.
A companion.
Right. But, and the fact that he reacts to you as you would expect makes you feel like you're sort of jointly there in the world.
Yeah.
And it was this really actually great stepping stone towards understanding how to do characters and what the minimum bar for a character would be, like for a really truly interactive character.
Yeah, the key about him was we just added in a bunch of even subtle but randomness for everything. There was always a few animations that would go through, and we had this huge network in the animation state machine where everything had an in, everything had a cycle, and everything had an out, and then there was a rule set of if you were here, you had the ability to go randomly to all these other things, and it would usually run through a few of the same cycles at the same time, but it gave the thing life. And people just started getting attached to it, and the feedback we get is I want more behaviors, and then they wanted to start bringing it with them to the other experiences as well.
Like in the photogrammetry scenes, before we had those scenes, and they were really cool looking scenes that looked like the real world, but there was nothing in them, right? You would just go in there, you look at them, and see that, and people are like, why isn't the dog with me? Like, why can't I get the dog from the other scene in me? And I'm like, we got to put the dog everywhere now.
And again, just for like feature creep, the dog was made to go on a flat plane. He was never intended to do anything. He was actually not intended to do anything.
Yeah.
And then with photogrammetry, as you know, it's just rough
just
and
terrain,
chaotic everywhere. And we, we came up with something that worked.
Yeah, but that was like, that enhanced that experience of being in the photo scenes, right? Because then it felt like, I'm taking this dog with me in all these different parts of the world.
Yeah, it made the different experiences feel more connected because there were similar elements that carried between them.
Exactly.
But yeah, like that was, we were still doing the thing where you were kind of sort of trapped in your room space size in the photogrammetry scenes. You see all this cool stuff in the distance, all these rocks you want to climb on.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we really need a way for you to be able to move further in that space.
Yeah, we were kind of designing our spaces, like the longbow and the slingshot experiences to kind of be within your room area and designing the space around that. But the photo scenes expose like a problem where people want to travel beyond where their physical limitations are. Right. And we had done experiments with teleporting before.
Right. Teleporting was one of the first experiments we ran, actually, way back when we had I think we were tracked Xbox controllers with the optical system.
Yeah.
And it works pretty well, and most importantly, it didn't make people nauseous, and that sort of put that in the drawer, but then kept running a lot of other experiments. You ran a bunch of them, I think.
Oh yeah, and I mean there was subtle iterations in that as well. Like when you teleport from one spot to another, instead of instantly jumping you, we fade to black and fade up from black, so it feels like you're blinking.
But you tried a bunch of different things in like the Aperture demo, right? You tried the Go-Go Gadget hands.
Oh yeah. So so once we were like, we want to be able to ship robot repair, which was built for GDC in a giant space. How do we let this work for other customers? And so I was trying an experiment where We called it Go-Go Gadget Arms, but basically the controllers, when you press a button, would extend out away from your hand, and it was sort of a multiplier where if your hands are close to your body, they're close, and the further you move away, the more they extend away. And so you could actually reach way, way out into the scene, stand in the middle of it, and grab and manipulate everything. But there was this problem where you could still open the drawer full of little people, but then it's way across the room. You can't actually lean down into the drawer and look at them really close. And so it didn't feel like a good enough solution for that type of thing. And we used that in Secret Shop as well. But once we started using teleporting in the photogrammetry scenes, it was like, oh, well, we should put that into those other scenes.
Yeah, so just like everybody, we were grappling with how to build bigger spaces and how to whether we should be building actual small room scale spaces or whether we knew that we wanted to be able to build bigger spaces and we needed to do that. We needed some kind of locomotion. And so we were casting around just like everybody else was at the time. Yeah. And it took us quite a while to sort of narrow down and agree that we were going to make it uniform throughout the lab.
Right. Well, but the actual mechanics of how the teleporting works also went through a bunch of iterations. Yeah. Previously, the first version we had was kind of gaze-based, where you would hold a button down and just look where you want to teleport. And our thinking behind that was, if you're always looking in the direction you're going, that's less of a chance of you getting sick, because you always have a frame of reference of where you're going to end up. But people were just confused by that, because that worked really well when you had an Xbox controller that wasn't tracked. Yeah. But once you started having tracked controllers, people would point.
Once it was tracked, it wouldn't matter if you told them it was gaze-based. They would
people would I'm going to point here.
We rolled with that. And
yeah.
accepted that feedback.
Yeah. So then we tried to do that thing where you're pointing at and looking at, and most people are always pointing the direction we're looking anyways. Yeah. And even the ones that aren't, we found that it doesn't really make them sick to teleport that way. And then we actually saw a video for budget cuts, and they had the arc in their game for teleporting, and we all thought that arc kind of worked better, because it naturally limits how far you can teleport just by the nature of how the arc works.
Right. And without that, we had the problem of just very subtle hand movements dramatically changing your...
Yeah, because the teleport line we had was just going infinitely, and so you could make a tiny movement and change exactly, completely where you're going to end up. Yeah. And the arc also lets you go to places that are higher than you, so you could go up a ledge using the teleport, and that worked out much better. And I think in the end there, we came up with a solution that kind of worked for all our experiences, and the idea there was to unify it so that we have only one system, and it works consistently across all of them.
Right. We also had a problem with people ratcheting themselves into the corner.
Yeah, that was one of the things we realized was people would teleport, they would teleport to a spot and then physically move around in their space, and then teleport back to where they were in the virtual world, but realize that, wait, I'm not standing where I was the last time I was here, because they physically moved in their space now, and now they're in the corner of their room.
This is kind of hard to describe, so maybe you can do it.
Yeah, so we're wrestling with this new discovery, this new realization that the concept of the player was no longer just this avatar, this point in space. Now it's bringing with it the sense of the player's physical environment and the size of it and the obstacles in it. And we sort of wrestled for a long time with how much to gloss over that and design sort of away from that troublesome fact.
How much do we just expect the player to figure it out?
Actually, we ended up at the point where we realized we actually needed to accept that there was a new skill that players need to develop and understand. They need, for the most comfortable experience in VR, they need to understand their own relation to their own room, to their own space. And we ended up erring towards presenting more information to the player and showing...
Yeah, we give them a hint now, when you teleport, we kind of show the bounds of the room when you're teleporting, and also show you a circle that says, this is where you'll be in your physical room when you end up teleporting. Right. And that kind of helped people gauge, okay, before I should teleport, I'm going to step one more to my right, so I'm in the center of my room and then teleport.
Right. Yeah, I think it's the key takeaway is VR is awesome in that it enables you to bring yourself into the virtual world, but the thing that kind of sucks about it is you're also bringing your physical world into your virtual world, and that has to kind of follow you around.
And we have to account for that.
We have to account for that, yeah.
But, in the end, I think it kind of worked out, and the teleporting worked fairly well for our context.
For our context. And we steered away from some experiences that we knew that were more difficult with that.
We purposely designed stuff that didn't require a lot of movement. We were most of our games you're kind of in one spot, but you can move around in your local space. And then in the photo scenes where there's no real pressure, time pressure or anything like that, you can teleport around and play with the dog and stuff. And that worked, like the systems we made worked for that. And also like part of the interaction stuff we did was like going back to our philosophy of like, let's just try to emulate what's in the real world, but make it work better or a more idealized version of that. And we kind of put that in all our experiences as well.
Yeah, we had a lot of throughout all of the experiences, they were actually fairly disparate until like scarily close to the end, to be honest. Yeah. And in each of those, we were all sort of independently doing UI and interface exploration too.
Right.
So like for quite a long time, just the way that your controllers worked, the way that your hands worked, the basic UI conventions were different. We were casting around for the ones that we were preferred.
And we found that towards the end, like what worked best for our context were when the controllers were analogs for your hand.
Right.
Right. Not a different abstraction there.
Right. We didn't feel like we were ready yet to do convincing hand models, so we decided that
we'll just show you the controllers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's obviously highly game dependent, but one of the strengths I feel of that is that you have absolute sort of, it's not hand presence, it's like positional presence, right? Like you can look at that thing and know that is the same thing that you're holding, and sort of maximize your appreciation for how precise the tracking is.
Going back to our the original GDC demo, that's one of the first aha moments that people get, right? When you put the headset on and then hand them the controllers, and then they just see floating controllers, and the hand naturally just goes there, and they're like, oh, I can grab this real world object in this virtual world.
It never gets old to hand someone a track controller.
Yeah.
You talked about doing design and UI design and such. Like finding out how to split the difference between doing physical spaces as UI was one of the challenges we faced as well.
Yeah, we had I think at that point when we had the demos that we've just been talking about, they were all presented kind of the same way through what we were referring to as the hub then, right? It was, we had the portal to each experience were just in a ball, kind of how we shipped.
Yeah.
But they were all just presented.
Right. So one of the observations that we had while we were playtesting was that before VR, people would talk about, like, I went and played that game, I went and did that thing. And when they were playtesting our early experiments, they kept talking about it like they had visited a place for each different experience. And those face spheres, we never did quite find the right name for those.
Face holes.
Pretty good.
Face holes.
Thanks.
Aperture face-mounted portal spheres.
Those came out of sort of trying to explore the idea of VR experiences as being a place. Like these are physical places that you can go visit that, because we're in VR, can also take on these sort of magical forms. That was, we were in a state where we were trying to figure out, we knew we were trying to bring the experiences together. We knew we were trying to ship all of these disparate experiences in one package. And we didn't want, we felt like it was the wrong thing to put them in a menu. It just felt.
Yeah, and I mean, for most of the development, I would say 90% to 95%, it wasn't called the lab, it wasn't called anything.
It was called minigames.
It was just a bunch of random things.
A bunch of minigames brought to you by Valve.
So we had this place called the Hub where all these little spheres were that you could.
Well, the Hub was literally just a white room with a desk on it.
I mean, it was a purely practical thing, right?
Yeah,
it was a place you go so that you can start the other thing.
It was literally a white room with a desk because we had an office desk model someone had made with drawers and stuff in it, and we just put that in the Hub and put the different wormholes or face holes on the desk, and that was it. The thing we saw though, like people wanted to interact with the Hub. People wanted to do stuff in the Hub. Like even simple things where people would like take the spheres and put them in the drawer and then close the door. And then when they came back, they expected it to be where they left them. Like, oh, I organized this on the desk.
Yeah, some people were confused by that, and some people were actually frightened, where they were like, who is moving my spheres? I didn't put them there.
Yeah. But the Hub at that point was mostly just a functional thing. Like it just acted as a place where you put the face holes on your face. And that was it.
But it was doing nothing to kind of bring any of the experiences together in a way that made sense, right? You had these little windows into different worlds, but it was like, why? Just,
and that was one of those things that changed dramatically after we went through. At Valve, we have a process, it's called Overwatch. And that's when we, as a team, decide we bring in a couple of people who are really experienced at shipping products, and they take the experiences home with them. They get to play it without us, looking over their shoulders with a clipboard or anything like that, unobserved and unfiltered, and then we bring them back to us to deliver their feedback. And it's a really good opportunity for us to hear a bunch of what missed opportunities that they see in our product, and also to sort of hammer home some of the feedback we've been getting, or even find new feedback, new pieces of ways to improve the game.
Yeah, it's a thing you do as you're approaching shipping, and you want to sort of validate the path you're on and sanity check it, and make sure that.
In hindsight, we should have probably done it a little
bit
earlier.
Yeah, we ended up doing it in like late January.
How much time was it? Like 10 weeks before we?
Yeah, not
Not
long.
But that was a really useful, really pivotal moment for us as a team, because we had been starting to pull the experiences together, but they weren't. You couldn't.
They were still separate
They
experiences.
were still too separate. You could just feel that they were too disparate and too disconnected. And so that was when we'd floated these ideas before, like it didn't come out of nowhere, but that was when we came on the idea of like sending it in the Aperture universe and sort of getting explicit about like embracing the idea that these are experiments, these are like.
Well, there are experiments, but also they're Aperture experiments.
Also Apertures.
Yeah.
We are Aperture, and we're experimenting with
like
these
who's
things.
Aperture, who's us? It's confusing.
So
Go ahead. I was going to say.
you're probably going to say the same thing I was.
I was going to say, like,
Let me guess.
The way that it caused us to just sort of refocus, and we hadn't done a lot of development on the hub because a lot of us kind of were at the point where we were nose down in developing the other experiences. And after we come back from Overwatch, it kind of hammered home the urgency, not just that we need to figure out some way to wrap these together, but also how much time we had left before ship. And so we set it in we figure out how to set it in the Aperture universe. We start decorating that out. We start figuring out what other features we want to have within the actual lab experience itself. But a lot of features sort of started to come online.
Yeah, I remember we had a really long meeting after the big Overwatch meeting, and we all like did a bunch of brainstorming and figured out, like, okay, we need to set this in Aperture universe. We'll set it in like the Pocket universe space, where in the office environment, because we've already established that these guys have cubicles and offices and stuff, and we'll make this super rich office environment with a bunch of stuff you interact with and stuff.
We came out of that meeting with just like, it was a 90-minute meeting. We came back with a whiteboard just filled with ideas.
Yeah.
And we were super psyched.
We're super excited. We're like, oh, we're going to do this. This is
then-
going to be so awesome. We sat down and somebody showed us a trailer for Job Simulator.
We're like,
And we're
oh,
like, oh yeah, they're doing an office cubicle thing, and we're like, well, we need to rethink some things again.
Yeah, we need to do this again.
Yeah, so we took a similar premise, except instead of doing it in an office, we're like, oh, let's do it in the lab, and these are scientists who are experimenting on these artifacts that they've found. And each artifact, they're sort of like pulling out the ether of what is that virtual world. They're trying to experience it themselves.
Yeah, the idea is those little guys don't understand the artifacts that they've found from the human world. They're just trying to pull out an experience to experience it for themselves. So you're getting there kind of warped.
Yeah, so you have like the postcards, and those are all kind of the real world places, and you have the big archway door that's the archery, and then you have the arcade machine, which is Zortex, and so that's like, sort of this retro arcade shooter is the aesthetic of that.
You mentioned Zortex. Zortex is one of the things that changed the most as a result of the process of Overwatch. In its earliest iterations, it was an RC chopper game, remote controlled.
Yeah, so going back to what you guys were saying earlier about emulating kind of real-world things and choosing to do the ones that you can actually make better than they are in real life. Like a small group of us thought that watching someone else fly an RC chopper in real life is really awesome until you try it yourself and you lose it forever. So we're like, well, surely with all the technology inside the Vive controllers, we can actually make that experience better, more intuitive. And we started working on this bullet hell sort of RC game, and it made perfect sense to us, and we were kind of testing it quite heavily, sort of on its own outside of the lab. To what we thought was great success, because in isolation it kind of worked pretty well and people got it. Just as an example of what it was, you kind of get an idea of what the control system used to be. If you play with the toy drone in the actual lab itself, you pick up the controller, and we use the gyro in the controller to kind of hint at the direction relative to you, where you want the chopper to go. And it is fun, and it does work. But it turns out, like, layering a game on top of that control system doesn't actually work that well, especially not when you've got things that are so immediately accessible as the dog and you know, things that...
Everything was like true interaction. All the other experiences were true interaction. You were...
Absolutely, and like the dog was the perfect essence of something that needs no instruction. You see a dog, you see a red ball, and you know exactly what to do. This required a lot of teaching. And
you guys even did a training.
Oh, we burnt so many weeks trying to make that kind of learning curve better.
And in isolation, it worked. Like
absolutely.
You would test out Zortex, and people would have fun with it. They'd learn it. They'd have fun. But then when we put it in the context of the lab, where you have all these other games that have very direct one-to-one control, and then they go into this RC thing, they crash their helicopter into a wall, and then they say, "Okay, I'm going to go back to the dog."
I'm going to play with the dog.
Yeah. One of the bits of feedback that we were grappling with was realizing that each experience needed to sort of be more pure and distilled in what it was trying to accentuate about VR. And the fact that Zortex had those abstract controls was sort of working against it. Like you're standing in one place and you're not really moving around the room, and the controls are they were using the motion controls, but they were abstracted. And the moment that I remember after Overwatch, you guys tried a bunch of different control schemes.
Zach went through about like 10 different things in the space of a day, and then all of them were kind of weird, but there was one that was like, holy shit.
Right, like
cool.
as soon as you stumbled on that direct control, and like it just sort of clicked for a bunch of us.
Yeah, the product started to kind of, the rest of the product was coming together, and it was clear to see what was kind of, what felt like it was part of the larger
the one thing we're glossing over here is Zortex itself was actually really close to being cut completely. We almost didn't ship it up until the last hour.
Yeah, I mean, if we wouldn't have found a control system that required no teaching, it wouldn't have shipped.
Yeah, it was very polished. It was actually one of the more polished things, especially at that time. It was really good. It was done. It was its thing, and we were willing to just.
Right, but it was having.
But it didn't fit in the product.
In a product that needed to be showcasing the vibe and the motion controls and all the possibilities, the fact that it was an interesting game in its own right, but the fact that the controls made people sometimes feel frustration with these controllers was completely the wrong thing. And like that was sort of why it got approached.
I know I was attached to the fact that the control scheme meant that there was a little bit of depth and kind of room to learn and get better, and a little bit of mastery, but totally missing the point that kind of in the lab that wasn't important. It was about immediacy and user friendliness.
And it created the new opportunity, because now you're holding this little plane in front of you and you're flying around like a toy, going pew pew pew, shooting everything. Yeah. But it encouraged people to walk through the room and actually dodge.
Yeah, that one was totally accidental, right? We didn't know that would happen. We shrunk the room down. And you were holding the thing, and just the scale that we settled on meant that it was enough for pretty much anyone in any space to be able to move around within a couple of paces and kind of avoid bullets.
Yeah, all the art actually looks way better at that scale too.
Yeah, the original RC one was a much bigger space that you were flying into, but once we scaled everything down to a size that you could move around within, seeing all those little miniature ships, it just looks so cool. Like it's a lot of high poly detail in there. Really looks great at that scale.
I felt like one of the advantages of our structure was that we were able to make course corrections like that very late, because the things we were building were so modular that it was okay for one of those to be risky, because we knew that we knew that we had the...
Yeah, if Zortex was tied into every other thing, we couldn't just suddenly cut it or change it in a significant way. It was very isolated in the sense that we could go and make big changes.
Right, if any one of them had to disappear, we had a structure that would let that gracefully happen.
Yeah.
I was going to add that one of the other nice benefits of the way that the Zortex redesign helped us out was it demonstrated a new type of gameplay where it wasn't about the player's body themselves, about them moving, necessarily physically being the character in the game, but having something that they were controlling within the game as well, and kind of demonstrated that in a different way. Became one of the more interesting and intuitive experiences.
That was our original goal, was to control this thing that wasn't you, to abstract your presence in VR. But we ended up sort of settling on a completely different way of actually achieving the same.
Yeah, so, I mean, all these big changes, I feel like was 2 weeks before GDC, maybe 1 week before GDC.
Yeah, it was quick.
Is that close?
It was
It
very
was
late.
super close.
Yeah, super.
It was pretty scary.
Yeah, so you know, we were trying to put together what do we want to show at GDC, and so we showed a bunch of the different games and spaces, and at the very end, we give people 10 seconds to look at the lab because it was completely under construction at that point. So
It didn't do anything at that point.
No, and that was like maybe 3 weeks before shipping.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing changed so dramatically in the last 2 months. Because it was pretty much 2 months before we shipped that we had Overwatch, right? Two and a half months?
3 months.
Okay. Yeah, and GDC was sort of a little bit into that, so that was our first sort of idea of whether our reaction to the feedback was going to work out for us in the end. And,
right,
and that-
we had a
it worked out.
last little bit of testing right at the end from GDC so that we could work in that feedback. I was just thinking it's interesting that even though the lab came very late, all of the different trophies or whatever you want to call them, the things that you take from the experiences to the center, that was there for a long, long time, like even in the hub.
Yeah, we had the idea of you go visit these spaces, and when you come back to the hub, you've taken something from that space back with you. So you would go to Longbow and come back, and then there'd be a bow and arrow in the hub.
And of course, the very first thing that you guys always did was, oh, we got a bow. Oh, there's a dog.
Oh yeah, the first time the dog and bow got combined.
That was a big discussion in the office. Like, what happens when you shoot the dog with the bow?
I missed the original slingshot prize, where you'd get a box, and the box would be.
Because the slingshot has a bunch of stuff to go in the back of the conveyor, where there's like robots going in boxes kind of thing. Yeah. So you come back to the hub, and there's this giant box waiting for you, and you go near it, and the dog pops out of it.
It's like something out of Alien.
Like
Pops up in your face.
It's like a weird unintentional jump scare.
Yeah, we argued for a long time about what should happen when you shoot the dog, and we had lots of fun.
Yeah, that was, well, originally, I think one of the first things that just happened, because that's how the code worked, was when you shot the dog, the arrows just kind of stuck in him. Because the arrows had code for, like, if I hit something, I stick in it.
Right.
And the dog was just like a porcupine dog with a bunch of arrows stuck in it. and we were like, oh, it'd be cool if the dog just shakes the arrows off and the stuff. But like, that just became way too complicated.
Yeah, the thing that we realized was that it almost didn't matter what it did. You needed to have some kind of believable reaction. You didn't want to actually hurt it. Obviously, you didn't want to actually hurt it. But
if the arrows just kind of bounced off and the dog didn't do anything, that would be completely unsatisfying.
Yeah, like we had these disparate elements and we put them together and we realized suddenly, oh, these need to interact in a way that makes you believe the world. Like you can't ignore, you can't just let it bounce off. You can't let the dog ignore it. Like it has to acknowledge it.
Well, it's like when we put stuff in the lab area, where we put the little aperture dudes running around and stuff. Like, oh, you have to be able to shoot them because you shoot them in the longbow game.
Yep.
So like, you have to maintain that consistency, which kind of makes these disparate games seem like they're part of a whole.
Yeah. So as we were building out the hub, there was a lot of, we kept having to sort of constrain ourselves because we'd realized that every element that we put in there needed to interact with the other elements. And we kept pulling out models that looked like you should be able to interact with them, but you can't.
We made this big matrix of, if we put this in, it has to do X, Y, and Z with all these other things.
Yeah.
And JobSim was doing a great job at that point, right, of showing us how important that is. If you see something that looks like something, it should also behave like that thing that looks like.
And if you look back through the other lab experiences, you can actually sort of understand the history of how we explored that. Like the shop and aperture are much less interactive than we would have built by the end.
Yeah, like that. Like the aperture demo has a bunch of props on the desk and things like that are just completely non-interactive because we didn't have controllers, we didn't have time. That was not in our radar back then. Yeah. And by the time we made the lab, we were like, no, we got to evolve and like make that be a priority where everything that looks interactive should be interactive.
Because basically everybody in the aperture demo will look at that stuff like the oscilloscope and the little Atlas model, and they're like,
everyone tries to dial the phone, right? Everyone tries to pick up the phone and dial, and it does nothing right now. But.
Yeah, we wanted to do more with those scenes, but since they were kind of older from the GDC and from the International, we sort of preserved them in their original state. You can still teleport around, which is a little different. In Secret Shop, we added the controls, so you have the lamp that you can carry around and shine on things. We had the shrinking in there from a long time ago, but we basically just upgraded them to work with motion controls and being able to teleport around, but kind of left them in the state that they were in.
Right.
Yeah.
There you have it, guys. That's why we made the lab.
What are we about done?
If you guys have any questions, we're going to be hanging out together. We didn't leave any time for this in this talk for questions, but if you have questions, we're going to be hanging out for the rest of the day together. Come find us. Come ask us questions. We want to help you guys make what you're making better.
Yeah. Hopefully it was helpful.
Hopefully what?
Hopefully it was helpful and
So thank you very much, guys.